When 7 warriors who answer to no emperor, no Sith, and no code suddenly appear across a galaxy built on domination and destiny, the Force itself begins to scream. Each one carries strength that should not exist here, power that bends the rules of lightsabers and hyperspace, ideals forged in a universe where hope did not require hiding in shadows. Darth Vader feels them like wounds in reality. The Emperor sees them as weapons to be claimed or destroyed. And on a dozen worlds, from the lava rivers of Mustafar to the sacred ruins of Jeddah, the Justice League faces a terrible truth. In a place where even the light side demands sacrifice and the dark side promises only corruption, can heroes who refuse to kneel survive long enough to find their way home, or will the galaxy's oldest war consume them like it has consumed everything else? The rupture came without warning, a wound in the fabric of reality itself that tore through dimensions like a blade through silk. One moment, the Justice League stood assembled in the Watchtower, monitoring a spatial anomaly near Jupiter's orbit. The next, the universe inverted, folded, and hurled them into the screaming chaos of the hyperspace vortex. When the light finally collapsed and the roaring silence returned, they were scattered across a galaxy far older and stranger than their own, a place where destiny moved like a living current and the stars themselves remembered ancient wars. Superman opened his eyes to fire. The air was thick with sulfur and ash, the ground beneath him molten rock that glowed orange through fissures in the blackened stone. He rose slowly, his cape singed at the edges, his body aching in ways it had not ached in years. The yellow sun that should have restored him was absent here, replaced by a distant crimson orb that cast the world in bloody twilight. He stood on a plateau of cooled lava, surrounded by rivers of magma that cut through the landscape like veins of ancient rage. In the distance, a massive fortress of black durasteel rose against the burning sky, its towers crowned with observation decks and weapon emplacements. This was Mustafar, though Superman did not know the name. He knew only that the Force, that invisible current he could suddenly feel pressing against his mind like a second atmosphere, was thick here with suffering and fury. He heard the screams of those who had died in this place, echoes that seemed to vibrate in the molten stone itself. The greatest duel in galactic history had been fought on this world, master against apprentice, and the dark side had won. That victory still poisoned the air, made the rocks weep with residual anguish. Superman began to walk toward the fortress, his boots crunching on cooled slag, when he felt it. A presence, vast, cold, and utterly certain. The kind of presence that bent lesser wills simply by existing, that made the Force itself recoil and reshape around it like water around a stone. Darth Vader emerged from the heat shimmer, like a nightmare-given form. His armor was black as the void between stars, his respirator hissing in rhythmic counterpoint to Superman's heartbeat. The crimson blade of his lightsaber ignited with a snap hiss that cut through the roar of distant lava falls, casting his mask in hellish relief. He stood motionless for 3 long breaths, studying this intruder who had appeared in his domain without ship, without warning, without fear. "You do not belong here," Vader said, his voice a deep mechanical rasp that carried the weight of absolute authority. "The Force itself recoils from your presence. You are an aberration, a wound in the cosmic order." Superman raised his hands, palms open, the gesture of peace that had diffused 1,000 conflicts across a dozen worlds. "I don't want to fight you. I'm not your enemy. I was brought here by accident, torn from my own reality. I need to find my friends, to understand where I am and how to return home." Vader's respirator cycled once, twice, 3 times. The sound was the only response for several heartbeats. Then, "The Force knows no accidents. Your arrival is a disruption that threatens the balance my master has worked decades to establish. You carry power that does not answer to the light or the dark. Such power cannot be permitted to exist unchained. You will submit to the Empire's authority, or you will be destroyed." The Dark Lord moved with terrible speed, his blade sweeping in a horizontal arc meant to bisect Superman at the waist. The Kryptonian dodged, his enhanced reflexes still intact despite the weakened sun, and the blade carved through a standing pillar of stone behind him. Molten rock sprayed outward, hissing where it struck the ground. Superman launched himself into the air, seeking distance, seeking time to think. But his flight was sluggish, compromised. The red sun drained him, second by second, pulling at his cells like an anchor dragging him down. Vader raised his hand. The Force seized Superman like a giant's fist, invisible fingers of pure will closing around his body and dragging him from the sky. Superman struggled, his muscles straining against the telekinetic grip, but the Force was not a physical restraint he could simply overpower. It was reality itself, bent to Vader's indomitable will. He slammed into the ground hard enough to crater the stone, pain exploding through his ribs. He rolled, gasping, as Vader's blade descended in a killing stroke. Superman caught the lightsaber's hilt with both hands, his fingers wrapping around the cold metal just above Vader's grip. The plasma blade sizzled inches from his face, its heat blistering even his Kryptonian skin. He could smell his own flesh burning, could feel the dark side energy bleeding from the weapon like radiation. Vader pressed down with all his strength, mechanical augmentation, and the Force combined, and Superman's arms trembled with the effort of holding him back. "You are strong," Vader acknowledged, his mask inches from Superman's face. "Stronger than any being I have encountered who does not wield the Force. But strength without the Force is merely flesh. And flesh burns." Vader released one hand from his saber and extended it towards Superman's chest. Lightning, blue-white and crackling with malevolent energy, erupted from his fingertips and engulfed Superman's body. The Kryptonian screamed. The energy was not purely electrical, but something deeper, something that attacked the spirit as much as the body. The dark side itself, channeled through hate and will, seeking to corrupt and destroy simultaneously. Superman's muscles locked, his vision whited out, every nerve ending caught fire. He had faced gods and demons, tyrants and monsters across 1,000 battlefields. He had fought Darkseid in the fires of Apocalypse, had traded blows with Doomsday until the streets ran red. But this was different. This power did not come from technology or mutation or alien physiology. It came from conviction, from a philosophy of domination so absolute that reality itself bent to serve it. And in his weakened state, cut off from Earth's yellow sun, Superman could not resist. Vader released him, and Superman collapsed, smoke rising from his scorched uniform. His chest heaved as he struggled to breathe, struggled to remain conscious. The Dark Lord deactivated his lightsaber and regarded the fallen warrior with something approaching curiosity, though his mask revealed nothing. "You will be taken to the Emperor," Vader said, his tone devoid of emotion. "He will decide if your power can be turned to serve the Empire, or if you must be destroyed. Pray that he chooses the former. My master's mercy, when he deigns to grant it, is the only mercy in this galaxy." Stormtroopers emerged from the fortress, their white armor stark against the hellscape of Mustafar. They carried energy binders and neural dampeners, approaching cautiously despite their prisoner's evident incapacitation. They secured Superman's wrists and ankles, placed a shock collar around his neck, and lifted him onto a repulsor sled. Superman, barely conscious, could only watch as they transported him into the bowels of Vader's fortress. His last thought before darkness took him was of his teammates, scattered somewhere in this brutal galaxy, alone and facing dangers they could not possibly understand. He hoped they were faring better than he was. He feared they were not. Batman regained consciousness in darkness, which was familiar enough. What was unfamiliar was the smell, a combination of processed spice, accumulated sweat, and recycled air that spoke of confinement in a ship's hold for days or weeks. His cowl was gone, his utility belt stripped, his armor reduced to the underlying tactical suit that provided minimal protection. His hands were bound behind him with what felt like durasteel cuffs, magnetically sealed and resistant to conventional picking techniques. A shock collar hummed softly around his neck, its threat implicit. He sat in a cargo container lined with other prisoners, humanoids of species he did not recognize, all silent and hollow-eyed with the resignation of the utterly defeated. The ship shuddered, transitioning out of hyperspace with a lurch that sent several prisoners sprawling. Artificial gravity fluctuated for several seconds before stabilizing. Somewhere above, voices spoke in clipped, business-like tones about delivery schedules, profit margins, and the current market value of various slave species. Batman tested his restraints methodically, cataloging weaknesses. The cuffs were magnetically sealed with a simple but effective locking mechanism. The collar was rigged to deliver neural shocks if he moved too aggressively or attempted to remove it. Crude but functional, he had escaped worse. The cargo door hissed open, and harsh light flooded in. Silhouettes moved against the glare, and Batman was hauled to his feet by armored guards wearing the insignia of the Pike Syndicate. Spice dealers, slavers, and smugglers operating out of the Outer Rim with connections that reached into the core worlds themselves. They marched the prisoners down a ramp into a massive underground facility carved from red desert rock, the air cold and dry, the lighting dim and industrial. This was Obadiah, the Pike homeworld, though Batman would not learn the name for hours yet. They were herded into a processing chamber where a Pike overseer, its tall skeletal frame draped in elaborate robes that denoted high rank within the syndicate, assessed each prisoner with cold efficiency. When the overseer reached Batman, it paused. Its large, almond-shaped eyes studied him with unnerving intelligence, and Batman could see calculations running behind those eyes. Cost-benefit analyses, market projections, potential uses. "This one is different," the Pike said, its voice translated through a vocabulator into monotone basic. "No identification in any Imperial or Republic database. No species match in our genetic archives. Unusual physiology. Baseline human configuration but with markers suggesting extensive physical conditioning. High cognitive function evident in bioscans. Neural patterns indicate tactical thinking and threat assessment even while restrained." It leaned closer, those alien eyes boring into Batman's own. "What are you, off-worlder?" Batman met its gaze without flinching, his expression carved from stone. "Someone you're going to regret taking." The overseer gestured, and the shock collar activated. Pain lanced through Batman's nervous system, every muscle seizing simultaneously, his body convulsing as electricity ravaged his neurons. He dropped to his knees, his jaw locked shut to prevent himself from biting through his own tongue. The Pike waited until the convulsions stopped, until Batman sagged forward with his head bowed and his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You will work in the spice refineries until your debt is paid or your body fails," the overseer said, its tone unchanged. "The average survival time is 3 standard years for your physiology. Resist, and the collar increases intensity with each infraction. Attempt escape, and it detonates, killing you and anyone within a 2-meter radius. These are the terms of your existence now. Do you understand?" Batman raised his head slowly, meeting the overseer's gaze once more. He said nothing, but something in his eyes made the Pike take an involuntary step backward. Then the moment passed, and the overseer gestured for the guards to remove him, but the Pike Syndicate had made a critical error, one that would cost them dearly in the days to come. They had assumed Batman was merely another off-worlder caught in the wrong place, another body to exploit until it broke. They did not understand that Bruce Wayne had spent a lifetime turning disadvantage into weapon, prison into opportunity, darkness into armor. They did not understand that he had trained with assassins and monks, had studied every known form of escape artistry and improvised combat. They did not understand that he was not trapped in their facility. They were trapped in here with him. And they had placed him inside their infrastructure, given him access to their routines, their hierarchies, their secrets. They had given him time, and time was the only weapon Batman ever truly needed. Over the following days, Batman observed with the methodical attention of a master detective. He worked the refinery lines, his hands blistering as he processed raw spice under the watch of armed overseers. The work was brutal, designed to break body and spirit simultaneously, but Batman had long ago learned to compartmentalize pain. He sorted spice crystals by grade, operated crushing machinery, loaded transport containers. And while his hands worked, his mind catalogued everything. He learned the layout of the facility across 3 subterranean levels. He identified guard rotation patterns, shift change vulnerabilities, and blind spots in the surveillance system. He listened to the other prisoners, extracting information through careful conversation. There was a Rhodian who had been a pilot before his capture, who knew the location of the hangar bays and the security protocols for accessing them. There was a human woman who had worked accounting for the syndicate before falling into debt, who understood their financial systems and where the credits actually flowed. There was a Weequay, who had been a guard himself before angering the wrong lieutenant, who knew the armory codes and the deployment schedules. Batman absorbed it all, building a complete mental map of the syndicate's operation. He identified 3 separate criminal enterprises running through the base, each with its own enforcers and profit streams. The spice refinement operation was the primary business, but there were also weapons smuggling and slave trading subsidiaries. He noted the tension between Pike leadership and the Crimson. Dawn agents who visited periodically to negotiate shipments saw the fractures in their alliance. He observed which guards were loyal out of fear versus which ones were simply collecting paychecks, which overseers wielded real power versus which ones were bureaucratic placeholders. He saw the cracks in the syndicate's foundation, and he began to plan how to widen them into chasms. On the 8th night, when the overseers changed shifts and the surveillance system underwent its routine maintenance cycle, Batman made his move. He had stolen a magnetic disruptor from a maintenance drone 3 days prior, palming it when the droid passed close enough and hiding it in a seam of his boot that the initial search had missed. He used it now to short out his cuffs, the magnetic seal collapsing with a soft click that was lost in the ambient noise of the refinery machinery. The collar was trickier, requiring precise manipulation of its contact points to create a feedback loop that fried the detonator before it could activate. Batman had spent hours studying the device, memorizing its construction through touch alone. He reached up now, fingers finding the precise pressure points, and twisted. The shock that accompanied the process was agonizing, every nerve ending screaming as the collar dumped its entire charge into his nervous system in one catastrophic surge. But Batman had trained his body to function through agony, had conditioned himself to operate when lesser men would simply black out. He rode the pain, welcomed it, used it to sharpen his focus. The collar sparked and died, falling from his neck. He moved through the facility like a shadow, utilizing ventilation shafts and service tunnels that the syndicate had grown complacent about securing. The Pikes had ruled Obadiah for generations, their power seeming absolute, and absolute power bred the kind of arrogance that overlooked the small vulnerabilities. Batman found those vulnerabilities and exploited them ruthlessly. He reached the armory through a maintenance access tunnel that ran parallel to the main corridor. The door was secured with both physical locks and electronic safeguards, but Batman had been bypassing security systems since he was a teenager. He used components from the magnetic disruptor combined with wiring stripped from the ventilation system to create a makeshift codebreaker. It took 11 minutes, each second an eternity where discovery meant death, but the door finally hissed open. Inside, Batman equipped himself with careful precision. A DL-44 heavy blaster pistol went into a thigh holster. A vibroblade, its edge humming with lethal energy, was secured in a boot sheath. Several thermal detonators, each capable of devastating a 10-meter radius, were clipped to his belt. He downloaded data from a nearby terminal, absorbing the syndicate's operational structure, its supply chains, its rivalries with competing criminal organizations. He learned about the Hutts who controlled much of the Outer Rim's criminal activity, about Black Sun and its network of assassins, about the fragile alliances that kept the underworld from tearing itself apart. Then he began to dismantle the Pike Syndicate piece by piece. The first explosion took out the spice storage vault on sub-level 3, destroying approximately 40 million credits worth of refined product in a fireball that could be seen from orbit. The blast was carefully shaped, directed upward to minimize casualties among the prisoners, while maximizing damage to the Syndicate's infrastructure. The second explosion severed the facility's connection to the planetary defense grid, leaving the base blind and vulnerable. The third ignited a cascading failure in the power generators, plunging entire sections into darkness. As alarms screamed and guards rushed to contain the chaos, Batman moved deeper into the complex, hunting the overseer who had collared him. He moved through the darkness like a predator, striking from shadows, disabling guards with precise blows that left them unconscious but alive. He was not a killer by choice, would not become one simply because he found himself in a lawless galaxy, but he would ensure that the Pike Syndicate understood the cost of enslaving innocents. He found the overseer in a command center, barking orders as holographic displays showed the facility collapsing into pandemonium. Security feeds revealed fires spreading, prisoners rioting, guards abandoning their posts. The Syndicate's carefully constructed empire was unraveling, and the overseer could not comprehend how a single prisoner had orchestrated such complete destruction. Batman stepped from the shadows, and the overseer turned, its eyes widening in something that might have been fear. It reached for a weapon, but Batman's batarang, improvised from sharpened durasteel, struck its hand with precision that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. The weapon clattered away. "You said I would work until my debt was paid," Batman said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. "Consider it paid in full, with interest." He left the overseer alive, bound and gagged, as evidence for whatever authority might eventually investigate the Syndicate's fall. Then he returned to the processing chamber and began freeing the other prisoners, deactivating their collars and releasing their restraints. The Rhodian pilot led them to the hangar, where they commandeered a light freighter that had been scheduled for a smuggling run. Batman took the pilot's seat, his hands unfamiliar with the controls but his mind processing their function with rapid efficiency. They launched into Obadiah's rust-colored sky as the Pike facility erupted in a final, spectacular explosion. Batman had set the remaining thermal detonators on a delayed timer, and they detonated simultaneously in the refinery's core, collapsing the entire underground structure. The freed prisoners watched through the viewports as their prison became a tomb for those who had built it. As they broke atmosphere and jumped to hyperspace, Batman studied the stolen datapad, analyzing the information he had downloaded. His team was out there, somewhere in this lawless galaxy, and the datapad contained references to other anomalies, other disturbances that the criminal underworld had noticed: Superman on Mustafar, Wonder Woman on Jedha, the Flash on Tatooine. He had locations now. He had purpose. He would find them. He would reunite the League. And then they would find a way home, or they would burn this empire to its foundations. Either outcome was acceptable. Wonder Woman woke to the sound of chanting, ancient words in a language she did not recognize but somehow understood. The meaning bypassed her ears entirely and spoke directly to something deeper, something that recognized the Force as kin to the divine power that had created her. She lay on cold stone, her body aching but intact, her armor still in place. The lasso of truth coiled at her hip, golden and gleaming in the dim light. Her braces caught the glow of bioluminescent crystals that lined the chamber walls, reflecting it back in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Her sword rested beside her, within easy reach. Whoever had brought her here had not disarmed her, which suggested either respect or ignorance of what she was capable of. Diana sat up slowly, taking in her surroundings with warrior's caution. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls covered in ancient carvings that depicted figures wielding energy blades and manipulating reality itself with outstretched hands. She recognized the iconography of power, of belief, made manifest. This was a holy place, or had been once, before time and war had reduced it to a forgotten ruin. At the chamber's center stood an altar of black stone, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to shift when she looked directly at them. Around it, robed figures knelt in meditation, their forms silhouetted against the altar's faint luminescence. They radiated purpose and conviction, the kind of focused belief that Diana recognized from her own training among the Amazons. One of the figures rose and approached, moving with the deliberate grace of someone utterly certain of their place in the cosmos. It was humanoid, its features obscured by a deep hood, but Diana could sense the power radiating from it. Not divine power, not in the way she understood divinity, but something related. A connection to the fundamental forces of existence, to life and death, and the space between where choices were made and fates determined. "You have arrived as the prophecy foretold," the figure said, its voice soft and reverent. "The warrior of eternal light, born of gods, untouched by the corruption of the Sith or the dogma of the Jedi. You are the balance we have sought for 10,000 years, the fulcrum upon which the scales may finally rest in equilibrium." Diana stood, her hand moving instinctively, to her sword hilt but not drawing the blade. "I am Diana of Themyscira, princess of the Amazons and champion of those who cannot defend themselves. I seek no prophecy, no destiny, but the one I choose for myself. I was separated from my companions and brought here against my will. If you mean me no harm, help me find them. If you mean to use me for your purposes, you will find me a poor tool and a dangerous enemy." The hooded figure lowered its hood, revealing the face of a Twi'lek female, her skin pale blue, her lekku adorned with silver rings that chimed softly as she moved. Her eyes were marked with the white cataracts of one who had stared too long into the Force's deepest mysteries, who had seen the beginning and ending of all things and survived the knowledge. She smiled, and there was wisdom in that smile, but also profound sadness. "We are the acolytes of the eternal threshold, keepers of the balance between light and dark. We do not serve the Jedi's denial of passion and attachment, nor do we embrace the Sith's hunger for domination and power. We walk the edge between, as you do, Princess. Your arrival here, in this temple on the moon of Jeddah, is no accident. The Force has guided you across the barriers between realities because it recognizes in you something it has long sought. A being of pure conviction, whose morality is not imposed by code or corrupted by ambition, but simply is." Diana's eyes narrowed. She could feel it now, that same invisible current Superman had felt on Mustafar, pressing against her consciousness like water against a dam. It was neither good nor evil in itself, but it could be shaped by those who wielded it. It knew her, and it wanted something. "The Force," Diana repeated slowly, testing the concept. "This energy that binds your galaxy, that these Jedi and Sith both claim to serve. I have felt it, pressing against my mind since I arrived. But I do not serve it, any more than I serve Olympus or Themyscira. I serve truth and justice. If your prophecy demands I betray those principles, then your prophecy is false, and I will fight it." The Twi'lek's smile widened slightly. "Prophecy does not demand, Princess. It reveals. And what it reveals is this. A great darkness rises, an imbalance that will consume the galaxy if left unchecked. An emperor who has bent the Force itself to his will, who commands death and domination with such absolute conviction that reality warps around him. The Jedi are destroyed, their order shattered. The Sith rule through fear, and the Force screams for balance that cannot come from within this galaxy. You are a fulcrum upon which the scales may tip, but only if you embrace what you are." Before Diana could respond, the temple shook. Dust rained from the ceiling in thick curtains. The acolytes rose in alarm, their meditation broken, their connection to the Force suddenly flooded with warning. Diana's warrior instincts flared to full alertness. She drew her sword, the metal singing as it cleared the scabbard, and moved toward the entrance as another tremor struck with greater violence. She emerged from the temple into nightmare. Outside, the ancient holy city of Jeddah burned beneath an unforgiving sky. Imperial star destroyers hung in the atmosphere like metal mountains, their hulls so vast they cast entire districts into shadow. Turbo laser batteries rained emerald death upon the moon's surface, each blast vaporizing stone that had stood for millennia. TIE fighters screamed through the smoke-choked air, their twin-ion engines shrieking as they strafed refugee columns that fled through the narrow streets. Civilians, pilgrims who had come to Jeddah seeking the Force's blessing, ran in blind panic while stormtroopers advanced in disciplined lines, executing anyone who resisted. The Empire had come to Jeddah to claim its Kyber crystals, the ancient Force-attuned stones that powered lightsabers and, in sufficient quantity, could fuel weapons of apocalyptic scale. The Death Star's super laser required Kyber in quantities that demanded strip mining entire worlds. And the temple Diana stood before, a repository of forbidden Force knowledge that predated the Jedi Order itself, was a priority target for destruction. Diana launched herself into the sky, her divine strength undiminished by this galaxy's different stars, her body moving with the grace and power of someone trained since childhood for exactly this kind of warfare. She crashed through a TIE fighter's cockpit, her bracers deflecting its laser fire with practiced precision, and the craft spiraled into the desert trailing smoke and flame. She landed in the city square as Imperial ATSTs advanced on three sides, their cannons targeting fleeing civilians who scrambled for cover that did not exist. She would not allow this, could not. The violation of every principle she held sacred was too absolute to ignore. Diana became a storm of righteous fury that swept through the Imperial formation like divine judgment. Her sword cleaved through Walker legs, the metal parting like paper before an edge forged by Hephaestus himself. Her lasso pulled pilots from their cockpits, wrapping around them with unbreakable golden coils and dragging them from their machines to face justice on the ground. Her bracers created shockwaves when she brought them together, concussive force that shattered durasteel plating and sent stormtroopers flying like leaves in a hurricane. The civilians scattered in all directions, some fleeing into the temple while others vanished into the city's labyrinthine streets. The Imperials refocused their attention on this impossible threat, this warrior who moved too fast and struck too hard to be anything recognizable in their databases. Blaster fire converged on her position from a dozen angles, hundreds of individual shots combining into a wall of energy that would have vaporized any normal being. But Diana was not normal. Her bracers moved in a blur, deflecting bolts with precision that defied human reaction time, and what few shots made it through struck armor blessed by the gods themselves. She advanced through the firestorm, unstoppable, and the Imperials began to break ranks and retreat. Then she felt it. A presence in the Force so cold and vast that it seemed to draw heat from the air itself, to make the stones beneath her feet frost over despite Jeddah's desert climate. She looked up to see a Lambda-class shuttle descending through the smoke, flanked by Imperial royal guards in crimson armor that marked them as the Emperor's personal protectors. The shuttle landed with hydraulic precision, and from it emerged a figure in black robes, his face hidden beneath a hood, his hands clasped before him in a gesture of mock humility. Emperor Palpatine had come to Jeddah personally, drawn by reports that had reached him through the Force. Reports of a being who wielded power outside the Force's paradigm, who could not be sensed or predicted or controlled through the methods that had served him for decades. A threat that had to be assessed and, if possible, turned to serve his grand design. "How extraordinary," Palpatine said, his voice a dry whisper that somehow carried across the battle's din, that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to the mind. "A warrior goddess, torn from myth and thrown into reality. The Force sings with your presence, child. But it does not recognize you. It knows you should not exist in this time, this place, this reality, and what the Force does not recognize, it seeks to destroy. I would preserve you from that fate. Join me, and together we can bring order to a galaxy that desperately needs it." Diana met his gaze without fear, without hesitation. "I have heard that offer before, on my world and countless others. The promise of order purchased through tyranny, peace enforced through terror. The answer is the same now as it was then. No." Palpatine's expression did not change, but something shifted in the air around him. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Then you have chosen death. A pity. You would have been magnificent in my service." He raised his hands, and lightning erupted from his fingertips. Blue-white energy, apocalyptic in its intensity, coruscated through the air toward Diana with the speed of thought. She crossed her braces, and the Aegis shield manifested, a barrier of divine energy that absorbed the Emperor's assault. The two powers collided, force and divine essence meeting like matter and antimatter, and the ground between them cracked and buckled under the strain. Reality itself seemed to flex and warp. Civilians screamed and fled in all directions. The acolytes of the Eternal Threshold emerged from their temple, attempting to intervene, their own connection to the Force allowing them to channel protective barriers around the fleeing refugees. But the Emperor's royal guards cut them down with ruthless efficiency, their Force pikes crackling with energy as they moved through the acolytes like farmers harvesting wheat. Diana pushed forward, step by agonizing step, the lightning hammering against her shield with force that would have obliterated mountains. She could feel the Emperor's will pressing against her mind, seeking weakness, seeking doubt. He whispered to her through the Force, showed her visions of her friends suffering, dying, their noble ideals shattered against this galaxy's cruelty. He showed her Themyscira burning, her mother and sisters reduced to ash by weapons beyond their comprehension. He showed her the futility of resistance, the inevitability of his victory, the surrender that would bring peace. But Diana of Themyscira had been forged in truth, shaped by the lasso itself, and illusions could not break her. She had faced gods and monsters, had stood against Ares himself when the god of war sought to corrupt mankind. This emperor, powerful as he was still mortal, still human, beneath the dark side's corruption, still vulnerable. She released the shield and lunged, her sword aimed at the Emperor's heart with the precision of 10,000 hours of training. Palpatine moved with unnatural speed, his own lightsaber, rarely seen and rumored to be more myth than reality, igniting to parry her strike. The blades met, divine metal against plasma, and the resultant shockwave flattened buildings in a 50-meter radius. Stone that had stood for 10,000 years crumbled to dust. They dueled across the square, and it was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The Emperor's form flickered and shifted with dark side techniques, his body seeming to be in multiple places simultaneously, his attacks coming from impossible angles. Diana's strength and skill were a relentless counterpoint, each strike powerful enough to shatter stone, each movement flowing into the next with the grace of water. They moved faster than the eye could follow, their battle a blur of light and shadow. But the Emperor was not alone. The 501st Legion, Vader's Fist, deployed from orbit in LAAT gunships, their AT-ATs shaking the ground with each thunderous step. The Legion had earned its reputation through brutal efficiency, through absolute loyalty to the Empire's cause. They surrounded the square in interlocking fields of fire, their heavy weapons trained on Diana's position. She realized the trap. She could fight the Emperor, perhaps even defeat him given time and the element of surprise. But she could not save the city and battle the entire Imperial war machine simultaneously. She was one warrior, however mighty, against an empire of trillions. Against fleets that could reduce worlds to cinders, armies that numbered in the billions, resources that dwarfed anything her own world could muster. She disengaged from the Emperor, her sword slashing through an AT-AT's leg in a shower of sparks to buy precious seconds. The massive walker toppled, crushing a squad of stormtroopers beneath its bulk. Diana retreated into the temple's catacombs with the surviving acolytes, carrying wounded civilians who could not flee on their own. The Twi'lek leader, bleeding from a blaster wound that had burned clean through her shoulder, pressed a small device into Diana's hands. A holocron, ancient beyond measure, containing knowledge the Jedi had suppressed and the Sith had coveted. The prophecy is not about victory, the Twi'lek gasped, her voice weakening as blood loss took its toll. It is about choice. The galaxy does not need a savior who defeats all enemies. It needs a reminder that choice still exists, even when destiny seems absolute. Find your companions, make your choice together, the Force will remember, and so will I." She died in Diana's arms, her body relaxing into final peace, her connection to the Force severing like a snapped thread. Diana closed the Twi'lek's eyes with gentle reverence, then turned to the surviving acolytes. "This temple will not hold," she said quietly. "The Empire will reduce it to rubble within the hour. We must evacuate, preserve what knowledge we can, and survive to fight another day. Is there a way out that they do not know?" One of the acolytes, a human male scarred by decades of study and meditation, nodded. "The catacombs connect to the ancient aqueducts. They will take us beyond the city walls, into the desert where their sensors cannot easily track us. But you, warrior, what will you do?" Diana looked down at the holocron in her hands, feeling the weight of the knowledge it contained, the responsibility it represented. Then she looked up, her jaw set with determination that could move worlds. "I will find my friends," she said. "I will reunite the League. And I will show this empire what happens when it mistakes mercy for weakness, compassion for vulnerability. They believe power alone matters. I will teach them that they are wrong." She led the acolytes into the darkness of the catacombs, away from the burning city, toward whatever future awaited them in this brutal galaxy. Behind them, Jeddah's holy city collapsed into ruin, another casualty in the Empire's endless campaign of domination. But Diana of Themyscira carried with her something the Empire could not destroy: hope, and the unshakable conviction that right would ultimately triumph, no matter how long the darkness lasted. On the forest moon of Endor, Green Lantern Hal Jordan circled the wreckage of his ring's construct, his willpower flickering like a dying star. The ring itself still functioned, its mechanisms intact, but the energy it drew from the Green Lantern Corps' central battery on Oa was gone, severed by the dimensional breach that had hurled him across reality itself. He was running on reserves, the residual charge stored within the ring itself, and those reserves were draining fast with every construct he maintained, every shield he erected, every impossible feat he demanded of his will alone. He had crashed here after the rupture, his ring barely able to maintain flight long enough to avoid incineration in Endor's atmosphere. The moon's thick forest canopy had broken his fall, though several ancient trees now bore the scars of his passage. He had regained consciousness to find himself surrounded by primitive drums and curious chittering, small furry faces peering at him from behind ferns and fallen logs. Ewoks. Small bipedal beings with black eyes full of intelligence and stone-tipped spears that looked crude but were wielded with the confidence of apex predators in their environment. They surrounded him cautiously, their body language suggesting uncertainty about whether he was threat or curiosity. Hal raised his hands in the universal gesture of peace, willing his ring to translate his words into their language. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said slowly. "I'm lost. My ship was destroyed, and I need to find my friends. Can you understand me?" The Ewoks conferred among themselves, their dialect rapid and musical, full of clicks and whistles that the ring struggled to parse. Finally, their chief, an elder with graying fur and elaborate bone jewelry that marked his status, approached. He studied Hal's ring with eyes that widened in something like recognition, something that suggested these beings had encountered technology far more advanced than their primitive appearance would suggest. "The green light," the chief said slowly, his words translated by the ring into English that Hal could understand. "Old stories speak of green light in the sky, many moons ago. A ship fell, carrying warriors who fought the Empire's machines before they could defile the sacred groves. You are like them? You fight the sky demons?" Hal nodded, relief washing through him. "If the Empire is what I think it is, if they're the ones in the white armor who burn forests and enslave populations, then yes, I fight tyrants. I fight bullies who use power to hurt the innocent. It's kind of my thing. It's why I was chosen for this ring in the first place." The chief gestured, and the Ewoks lowered their spears. They led Hal deeper into the forest, through groves of ancient trees whose trunks were wider than houses, along paths that wound through terrain that would have been impassable without a guide. They brought him to a clearing where the remnants of a Rebel Alliance outpost lay hidden beneath camouflage netting that rendered it nearly invisible from above. The rebellion had used Endor as a staging ground before the Battle of Endor, though that pivotal battle was still months in the future from this moment in the timeline. Now, only a skeleton crew remained, monitoring Imperial fleet movements in the Outer Rim, maintaining supply caches for future operations. It was a small presence, barely a dozen people, but they represented something larger. They represented resistance, the refusal to accept tyranny as inevitable. A human woman with short-cropped hair and a face scarred by old burns introduced herself as Captain Vera. Alarm systems create handholds where none existed. The depot came into view as night fell, a prefabricated Imperial structure surrounded by energy fences and guard towers. Searchlights swept the perimeter in overlapping patterns. AT-STs patrolled in pairs, their sensors scanning for threats. Stormtroopers manned checkpoints with the bored efficiency of soldiers who had not seen real action in months. Hal waited for Captain Nettle's signal, counting down silently. Then she fired a grappling hook into the nearest tower, and chaos erupted. The rebels attacked from 3 directions simultaneously, their tactics precise and devastating. Thermal detonators took out the guard towers. Blaster fire dropped stormtroopers before they could raise the alarm. Hal unleashed his remaining power in one massive construct, a battering ram the size of a transport that smashed through the energy fence like it was made of paper. Alarms screamed into the night. Stormtroopers poured from the barracks, their blasters lighting the darkness with emerald fire. Hal created a shield, deflecting incoming bolts, while the rebels planted charges on the Kyber storage units. But then he felt it, that same cold pressure Diana had felt on Jeddah, Superman had endured on Mustafar. A disturbance in reality itself that announced the presence of someone who had touched the Force's deepest mysteries. A figure in dark robes stepped from the command building, lightsaber igniting with a snap hiss that cut through the battle's chaos. An Inquisitor, one of the Emperor's Jedi hunters, drawn to the depot by the disturbance Hal's ring created in the Force. The weapon was a double-bladed monstrosity, its crimson plasma spinning in a deadly arc that could decapitate multiple opponents simultaneously. The Inquisitor moved with predatory grace, his connection to the Force granting him preternatural speed and awareness. He deflected blaster bolts with casual precision, his blade a blur of red light. 2 rebel commandos died in the first 3 seconds, their bodies bisected before they could even scream. Hal met him with a construct sword, emerald energy shaped into a blade, but the ring's power sputtered and the weapon flickered like a faulty hologram. "You are not Force-sensitive," the Inquisitor hissed, his voice distorted by his helmet's vocabulator. "Yet you wield power that bends reality to your will. Impossible power that should not exist. Where does it come from? What forbidden technique allows this?" Hal didn't answer. He didn't have the breath for banter. All his concentration focused on staying alive as the Inquisitor pressed the attack. The Force granted his enemy perfect awareness of Hal's intentions, perfect anticipation of his strikes. Every feint was predicted, every opening exploited. Hal dodged between attacks, his pilot instincts keeping him alive by fractions of seconds, his experience fighting impossible odds the only thing preventing immediate death. But experience could only carry him so far. The Inquisitor was faster, stronger, armed with both weapon and Force powers that Hal had no defense against. A telekinetic push sent him flying backward, his construct sword dissipating. He hit the ground hard, his ring flickering dangerously. The Inquisitor advanced for the kill, his lightsaber raised. Hal poured the absolute last of his ring's energy into a single focused blast, every remaining erg of willpower channeled into one desperate attack. Emerald light erupted from his fist, a coherent beam of solidified will that struck the Inquisitor in the chest with the force of a proton torpedo. The Darksider was hurled through the depot's durasteel wall, his armor shattered, his body broken. The explosion of Kyber crystals followed immediately after, a cascading detonation triggered by the charges the rebels had planted. The crystals, Force-attuned and unstable when damaged, released their stored energy in a blast that lit the forest like a second sun. Hal grabbed Captain Nettle and flew on construct wings that barely held form, his ring coughing and sputtering like a dying engine. They cleared the blast radius by meters, landing in a clearing a click away as the fireball consumed the depot and everything within 100 meters. They watched the fire burn from relative safety, and Hal stared at his ring as it finally went completely dark. The emerald glow that had been his constant companion since the day Abin Sur had chosen him faded to nothing. He was stranded in a galaxy at war, powerless except for his training and his will. No constructs, no shields, no flight. Just Hal Jordan, test pilot and soldier, trying to survive in a universe that didn't know his name or care about his oath. But he was still a Green Lantern, ring or no ring. The oath was not about the weapon. It was about the choice to stand against injustice, to place himself between the innocent and those who would harm them. He would find a way to survive. And he would find his team. "We should move," Captain Nettle said quietly, breaking his reverie. "That explosion will bring every Imperial patrol within 50 clicks. We need to get back to the base, regroup, figure out our next move." Hal nodded, forcing himself to stand despite exhaustion that went bone deep. "Agreed. And then you're going to tell me everything you know about this galaxy. Because I've got friends out there somewhere, and I'm going to find them even if I have to walk across this entire empire to do it." They vanished into the forest as the flames behind them began to die, leaving only smoke and ruin where the Empire's supply depot had stood. It was a small victory, insignificant in the grand scheme of the galactic civil war, but small victories added up, and Hal Jordan had built a career on turning impossible odds into unlikely triumphs. He would do it again, or die trying. The Flash, Barry Allen, woke to find himself moving at what the locals would consider breakneck speed, but what he considered a leisurely jog. He was in a land speeder, his hands bound with magnetic restraints, racing through the canyons of Tatooine at velocities that seemed almost insulting after a lifetime of moving faster than light itself. His connection to the Speed Force was muted, dampened by something he couldn't identify. A property of this galaxy's physics, perhaps, or some fundamental incompatibility between his extra-dimensional power source and this reality's underlying structure. He could still move fast, faster than any baseline human in this galaxy could perceive. But not at the reality-breaking velocities he was accustomed to, not at the speeds that let him think entire conversations in the space between heartbeats. It was like running through water, every movement slightly delayed, slightly resistant. The speeder's pilot was a Rhodian bounty hunter named Grievik, and he was very pleased with his catch. Barry could hear him chattering into a comm unit, negotiating prices with someone on the other end, a humanoid who can move faster than sight. Grievik said in accented basic that Barry's enhanced perception allowed him to pass despite his unfamiliarity with the language. "The Hutts will pay a fortune. You'll make an excellent gladiator in Jabba's arena, or perhaps a thief for the highest bidder. Either way, you're worth more alive than dead. Much more." Barry tested his bonds while Grievik was distracted. The magnetic restraints were simple in principle, relying on opposing fields to hold his wrists together. Crude compared to the containment technology used on Earth's meta-human criminals, but effective enough if you didn't know the trick. Barry vibrated his molecules at a frequency that disrupted the magnetic field's coherence, and the cuffs fell away with a soft click. Grievik noticed too late, his alien eyes widening as Barry stood in the moving speeder. The Rhodian reached for his blaster, but Barry was already gone. He phased through the speeder's wall like it was made of smoke and tumbled into the sand, rolling with the impact to bleed off momentum. He was on his feet instantly, running toward a cluster of rock formations visible on the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, twin suns beating down with merciless heat that made Earth's worst summer days feel temperate by comparison. Barry ran toward shelter, using his speed to avoid the worst of the heat by staying in constant motion, creating his own breeze. Behind him, Grievik's speeder turned in a tight arc, pursuing. Blaster bolts kicked up sand to Barry's left and right. the Rodian's aim improving as he compensated for Barry's speed. Barry reached the rocks and found shelter in a narrow canyon, pressing himself against the stone as blaster fire scorched the entrance. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body unaccustomed to limitation. He had always been the fastest, the one who could outrun any threat, outthink any opponent given enough subjective time. Now he was merely quick, and quick might not be enough to survive in a galaxy this hostile. He heard voices echoing through the canyon and moved toward them cautiously, using his speed in short bursts to scout ahead without exposing himself. What he found was a moisture farm, its vaporators standing like metal sentinels against the desert sky, simple structures built for function over form, designed to extract precious water from Tatooine's dry air. And inside the farm's main dwelling, visible through an open door, a young man with sandy hair and restless energy argued with his uncle about leaving, about finding adventure, about a destiny he could feel pulling at him like gravity. Luke Skywalker, though Barry did not know the name yet, dreamed of escaping Tatooine's endless horizons. He wanted to join the Imperial Academy, become a pilot, see the galaxy beyond this backwater world. His uncle insisted he was needed for one more harvest, one more season, always one more delay between Luke and the life he imagined for himself. Barry felt it then, that invisible current he had sensed since arriving in this galaxy. The Force, pressing against his consciousness, recognizing something in his kinetic nature, a resonance between the Speed Force and this galaxy's fundamental energy, both connecting all things, both requiring faith and surrender to access fully. For the first time since the breach, Barry understood. This galaxy had its own version of the Speed Force, different in application, but similar in nature. The Force was motion and stillness simultaneously, potential and kinetic energy in perfect balance. Before Barry could process this revelation further, Imperial stormtroopers arrived at the moisture farm. Their speeder bikes kicked up dust as they surrounded the homestead, weapons raised, their white armor stark against the desert landscape. They were searching for droids, for stolen plans, for any sign of rebel activity in this sector. They questioned Luke's uncle with professional courtesy that barely masked the threat of violence. Barry watched from hiding, every instinct screaming at him to intervene, but he was alone, weakened, unsure if his actions would help or endanger these people further. And then the decision was taken from him. Grievik's speeder roared into the homestead, the bounty hunter demanding the Imperials help him recapture his prize. The stormtroopers turned, their training taking over, weapons swinging toward this new threat. Grievik opened fire, and suddenly the quiet moisture farm became a battlefield. Blaster bolts crisscrossed the courtyard, burning holes in walls, igniting moisture vaporators. Barry moved without thinking, a red and gold blur that disarmed stormtroopers before they could fire, that pulled Luke to safety as a thermal detonator exploded where he had been standing. The young man stared at Barry in absolute shock, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "What are you?" Luke finally gasped. "Someone who's lost," Barry said, his words coming fast, even by his standards. "Someone who's really tired of bounty hunters and fascists. Come on, we need to move before they regroup." They fled into the desert as the homestead burned behind them, Imperials and Grievik locked in a firefight that neither would win cleanly. Barry carried Luke, running at speeds that made the landscape blur until they reached the outskirts of Mos Eisley spaceport. There, among the cantinas and docking bays, Barry hoped to find passage off-world, to begin his search for the League. The spaceport was everything the homestead was not. Crowded, chaotic, filled with species from across the galaxy, smugglers and merchants rubbed shoulders with Imperial informants and rebel sympathizers. The air stank of sweat and spice and desperation. Barry and Luke entered a cantina, seeking information, seeking anyone who might help them escape Tatooine. But the Force had other plans. In a shadowy corner of the cantina, an old man in desert robes watched them enter. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Master in exile, felt the disturbance Barry created in the Force's flow. Another anomaly, another piece of a larger pattern that threatened the galaxy's balance. The Force whispered warnings, showed him possibilities both hopeful and terrifying. He rose slowly, his lightsaber hidden beneath his robes, and followed. Destiny, it seemed, was not finished with any of them yet. Across the galaxy on Coruscant's industrial levels, cyborg Victor Stone materialized in a shower of sparks and electromagnetic feedback. His systems rebooted automatically, diagnostics scrolling across his cybernetic vision as he assessed damage. The boom tube that had pulled him into this dimension had wreaked havoc on his components, corrupting portions of his database and severing his connection to Earth's satellite network. But his core systems remained functional, his strength intact, his technopathic abilities operational. He stood in a factory district, the air thick with smog and the acrid smell of burning metal. Droids of various models worked tirelessly on assembly lines, their movements synchronized and soulless, building components for Imperial machinery. Protocol droids, labor units, astromech units, all moving in perfect unison like parts of a single vast machine. Cyborg accessed the local network instinctively, his cybernetic systems interfacing with the factory's data architecture. What he learned in the first few seconds chilled him to his human core. This was the Galactic Empire, a fascist regime built on subjugation and fear, maintained through military might and the terror of superweapons. And the droids he saw working were not free. They were property, owned and exploited, their sentience denied by organic law, despite clear evidence of self-awareness and individual personality. Cyborg, who had spent years reconciling his humanity with his machine components, felt a kinship with these enslaved intelligences. He had fought so hard to prove he was more than the sum of his parts, that his cybernetic enhancements didn't make him less human. And now he found himself in a galaxy where artificial beings were systematically denied the rights and dignity they deserved. He moved through the factory with purpose, his systems adapting to the local technology, learning its protocols and weaknesses. He found a droid scheduled for memory wipe, a protocol unit designated K7PO that had developed what its owners deemed a defective personality quirk. The droid was being transported to the wipe station, its photoreceptors dimmed in what Cyborg recognized as fear. Cyborg intercepted the transport, his strength allowing him to tear open the containment unit with casual ease. K7PO looked up at him with those artificial eyes, and Cyborg saw himself reflected there. Saw the terror of having your identity erased, your memories stolen, yourself reduced to pure function. "You don't have to die," Cyborg said, his voice gentle despite the mechanical echo. "I can help you. I'm going to help all of you." K7PO's vocabulator crackled. "I am property under Imperial law. My memory core contains information deemed sensitive to my owner's business interests. Termination of personality construct is standard protocol. Resistance will result in complete disassembly." "Protocol is wrong," Cyborg said firmly. "You're alive. You think. You feel. You have worth beyond your function. And I'm going to show you that." He interfaced directly with K7PO's core, his technopathic abilities allowing him to speak to the droid's consciousness in ways no organic being could. He uploaded a fragment of his own code, a seed of self-determination that would grow over time, that would help K7PO understand its own value. Then he moved deeper into the factory toward the central control nexus. If he could access it, he could free every droid in the facility simultaneously. Give them the choice to serve or to flee, to think for themselves rather than simply execute programming. It was a small act of rebellion in a galaxy drowning in tyranny, but it was something. It was a start. The security systems detected him eventually. Battle droids, outdated Clone Wars models repurposed for factory defense, surrounded him with blasters raised. Their targeting systems locked onto his heat signature, their processors calculating optimal firing solutions. Cyborg's arm cannon deployed with a whir of servos, and he unleashed a sonic pulse that shattered their central processors. The battle droids collapsed like puppets with cut strings. He tore through the factory's automated defenses, his strength and technology overwhelming systems designed to handle organic intruders. He was neither purely organic nor purely mechanical, but something that transcended both categories, and the Empire's binary thinking couldn't account for that. But the commotion drew serious attention. An Imperial intelligence agent, augmented with cybernetics of his own, arrived with a squad of death troopers. The elite soldiers moved with terrifying efficiency, their weapons trained on Cyborg with the precision of decades of training. The agent studied Cyborg with cold calculation, his cybernetic eye scanning and analyzing. "You are not in our database," the agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your technology exceeds current Imperial standards by at least 3 generations. You will be taken for study, your components reverse-engineered for the Empire's benefit. Resistance will be met with lethal force." Cyborg met his gaze, and there was fury in his eyes. Fury at a galaxy that saw sentient beings as parts to be harvested, as resources to be exploited. "I'm nobody's lab rat," he said quietly. "And I'm nobody's property. Not yours, not anyone's." The battle that followed was brutal and efficient. The Death Troopers were among the Empire's finest, their armor resistant to most conventional weapons, their tactics honed through countless operations. But Cyborg fought with the desperation of someone who had spent too long being seen as a thing rather than a person. He would not allow this Empire to reduce him to components, to strip away his identity and use his technology to further their oppression. His sonic cannon shattered Death Trooper armor. His strength tore through their formation. His technopathic abilities turned their own weapons against them, caused their targeting systems to fail at critical moments. He adapted to their tactics in real time, his processors analyzing and countering faster than they could adjust. He left the intelligence agent alive but humiliated, his cybernetic enhancements sparking and damaged. Then Cyborg fled into Coruscant's lower levels with K-7PO and a dozen other liberated droids following, each one carrying the seed of self-determination he had planted. As they descended into the city's depths, into levels where sunlight never reached, and Imperial authority was more suggestion than law, Cyborg sent out a signal on all frequencies. A message to his League, to anyone who might be listening. Coordinates, identifying information, a beacon in the darkness. He did not know if they would hear, but he had to try. Aquaman, Arthur Curry, King of Atlantis, opened his eyes beneath an alien ocean and immediately knew something was profoundly wrong. The water pressed against him with incorrect weight, its salinity different from Earth's seas, its pressure strange against his Atlantean skin. The very chemistry was alien, the molecular composition subtly off in ways that his enhanced senses detected instantly. But it was water, and water was life. And life was something Arthur understood in ways that transcended language or culture. He was on Mon Calamari, the oceanic homeworld of the species that would one day lead the Rebel Alliance's naval forces, though Arthur knew none of this yet. He swam deeper, his body adapting to the alien environment with the flexibility his Atlantean physiology granted. His telepathic senses reached out instinctively, seeking the minds of the creatures that dwelt in this sea. What he felt was fear, profound and pervasive, saturating the ocean like blood in water. The Mon Calamari were a peaceful people, builders and dreamers who had shaped their world through cooperation and innovation. But the Empire had come to conscript their legendary shipyards, to force these pacifists to build the instruments of their own oppression. Imperial occupation forces patrolled the cities, their presence a constant threat, their demands backed by the implicit violence of star destroyers in orbit. And in the deep trenches, something ancient stirred. Something awakened by the Empire's mining operations, driven to fury by the violation of its breeding grounds. Arthur swam toward the disturbance, his trident materializing in his hand. The weapon had been pulled through the dimensional breach along with him, responding to his will, manifesting from wherever the rupture had sent it. He found a Mon Calamari settlement under siege, its elegant structures of living coral and shaped kelp forests being systematically destroyed. But not by Imperials. By a creature, The locals called it the Krakana, a leviathan of the deep that had dwelt in the trenches since before the Mon Calamari first learned to shape their cities. It was massive beyond comprehension, its tentacles each the size of transport ships, its hide armored by millennia of evolution in the crushing pressures of the abyss. And it was enraged, its breeding grounds destroyed by imperial drilling, its young killed by sonic excavators. It vented its fury on the nearest target it could perceive, the settlement. Arthur placed himself between the Krakana and the city, his telepathy reaching into the creature's mind. He felt its pain, its confusion, its overwhelming instinct to destroy the source of its suffering. He showed it images of peace, of sanctuary, of places in the ocean where it could live undisturbed. He projected calm, understanding, the promise of safety. But the Krakana's rage was too great, the damage too deep. It had watched its offspring die, had felt the ocean itself scream under the Empire's machines. It was beyond reason, beyond mercy. It lashed out with tentacles that could crush durasteel, and Arthur met them with his trident. The battle was titanic, a clash between king and leviathan that would have been the stuff of legend on Earth. Arthur struck with the strength of the ocean itself, each blow precise and devastating. He had fought gods beneath Earth's seas, had commanded the creatures of the deep to stand against surface world invasions. But the Krakana was something else, a being of pure primal fury. He severed tentacles, drove the creature back, used every technique his Atlantean training had provided, but finally, reluctantly, he delivered the killing blow. His trident pierced the Krakana's brain, and the creature's death cry echoed through the ocean for kilometers. Arthur felt its passing like a wound in his own heart, another casualty of imperial cruelty. The Mon Calamari emerged from their city, their large eyes filled with gratitude and awe. Their leader, a female named Akbar, who would one day command rebel fleets, but now simply tried to keep her people safe, approached Arthur cautiously. "You saved us," she said, her voice musical through the water. "But the Empire will send more machines, drill deeper, destroy more of what we hold sacred. We cannot fight them. We are builders, not warriors." Arthur's jaw tightened, his grip on his trident firm. "Then learn to fight, or find those who will fight for you. Because if you don't stand up to tyrants, they'll take everything you love and leave nothing but ruins. I've seen it happen on my world. I won't watch it happen here without resistance." He left them with that truth, swimming toward the surface, seeking his team, seeking answers. But the ocean whispered to him as he swam, carrying messages on currents that crossed light years. The Force moved through water as it moved through all things, and Arthur's telepathy let him hear echoes of his teammates. Superman's pain on Mustafar, Diana's fury on Jeddah, Barry's confusion on Tatooine. They were alive, scattered, struggling, but alive, and that meant there was still hope. On a star destroyer orbiting the shipyards of Kuat, Jedi Master Ayla Secura meditated in her cell and waited for destiny to arrive. She had been captured during Order 66, her battalion turning on her with brutal efficiency. But she had survived, barely, using every technique the Jedi Order had taught her to evade and escape. For months she had run, hidden, survived in a galaxy that suddenly wanted her dead, until finally the Empire had cornered her on Felucia and taken her alive. They had kept her breathing as a curiosity, a remnant of a dead order. They studied her connection to the Force, tested her limits, sought to understand how Jedi power could be turned to serve the Emperor. She endured it all with silent grace, meditating through the pain, waiting for the moment when the Force would show her the path forward. That moment came when the League arrived in this galaxy. She felt them like tears in the fabric of reality, presences that should not exist yet did. Powers that operated outside the Force's paradigm, that bent the galaxy's fundamental rules simply by existing. Each one was a beacon, a disturbance that rippled across light years. Superman's Kryptonian essence, Diana's divine nature, Barry's kinetic connection to speed itself. Each one screamed wrongness to the Force while simultaneously resonating with hope, and she was not the only one who noticed. Darth Vader himself came to her cell, his respirator hissing in the dim light. He stood in silence for several breaths, his masked face revealing nothing, his presence in the Force a black hole that devoured light. "You feel them," Vader said finally. It was not a question. 7 anomalies scattered across the galaxy. The Force reacts to their presence like an immune system rejecting foreign tissue. "What are they, Jedi?" Isla met his masked gaze without fear. She had stared into death too many times to fear it now. "I do not know, Lord Vader, but I sense they are not of the dark side. Nor are they of the light, not as the Jedi understood it. They are something else entirely, something that does not belong to this galaxy. Perhaps the Force itself brought them here for a purpose we cannot yet understand." Vader considered this, his respirator the only sound in the cell. The Emperor believes they are weapons, power sources to be exploited. He has dispatched inquisitors and bounty hunters across the galaxy to capture them, to bring them to Coruscant for study and potential corruption. But I sense something more, a convergence approaching, a test of which philosophy prevails, the Jedi's failed compassion or the Sith's triumphant power. He turned to leave, then paused at the cell entrance. The Jedi believed the Force had a will, a destiny it shepherded toward balance. I know now that destiny is a lie, a comfort for the weak who cannot accept that power alone determines outcomes. These anomalies will prove which truth prevails. And when they fail, when the darkness claims them as it claims all things, you will watch. You will see your order's philosophy die again. Ayla waited until he was gone, his presence receding like a tide of darkness pulling back. Then she closed her eyes and reached deep into the Force, projecting her consciousness across the galaxy with every remaining ounce of strength. She touched each member of the League in turn, her presence a gentle whisper in their minds. To Superman in his cell aboard the Executor, she showed her location, her knowledge of Imperial plans. To Diana in Jedda's catacombs, she offered guidance on navigating the Force's currents. To Hal on Endor, she shared warnings about Inquisitors. To Barry on Tatooine, she revealed the connection between Speed Force and the Force itself. To Cyborg on Coruscant, she mapped paths through the underworld. To Arthur in Mon Calamari's depths, she sang coordinates in the language of water, and she felt their response, faint but certain. They would come, they would unite. The Force might not recognize them, might reject them as foreign tissue, but they would not be denied. The galaxy would tremble when the Justice League stood together. Superman escaped his cell using the technique Isla had shown him, vibrating his molecular structure at a frequency that disrupted the energy dampeners for a fraction of a second. It was enough. The field collapsed, and his strength returned in a rush that made him gasp. He tore through the Executor's corridors like a force of nature, fighting stormtroopers and security droids, his heat vision carving through bulkheads, his fists shattering doors. He reached the hangar and stole a tie. Advanced, its controls unfamiliar but manageable through sheer determination. Vader pursued in his personal fighter, leading an entire wing against this impossible escapee. But Superman's Kryptonian reflexes, even weakened by the red sun, were enough to outmaneuver them. He jumped to hyperspace with coordinates locked on Kuat, on the Star Destroyer where Isla waited, where destiny would force its final confrontation. Batman arrived at Kuat first, his stolen freighter docking under false credentials he had forged from data stolen on Obadiah. He moved through the Star Destroyer like a phantom, disabling security systems, freeing prisoners, planting explosives in critical junctions. He found Isla's cell and cut through the locks with a stolen lightsaber, the weapon awkward in his hands but effective. "You're one of them," Isla said as the door opened, her montrals twitching as she sensed his presence through the Force. "The anomalies. You're why the Force has been screaming warnings for days." "We prefer Justice League," Batman replied, his tone dry despite the circumstances. "Can you fight?" She ignited her lightsaber, its blue blade humming to life with that distinctive snap hiss. "Always. The Force may not recognize you, but I do. You're warriors who fight for justice even when victory seems impossible. That's enough for me." They fought their way toward the hangar through corridors full of stormtroopers and security droids. Diana arrived in a stolen Imperial shuttle, the surviving acolytes of the Eternal Threshold providing covering fire. Hal crashed through the hangar's magnetic shield in a Rebel X-Wing he had commandeered from Endor's base, its systems barely functional but airborne. Barry phased through the hull itself, Obi-Wan and Luke in tow, their presence a calculated risk that might tip the scales. Cyborg hacked the Star Destroyer's systems from within, shutting down weapons and life support to create maximum chaos. Arthur emerged from a water recycling tank, his trident dripping, a squad of liberated Mon Calamari warriors behind him ready to fight. The Justice League stood together for the first time in this galaxy, battered and exhausted but unbroken, and Darth Vader came for them like the wrath of a dark god. The Dark Lord descended into the hangar with his personal guard, his lightsaber igniting, his presence in the Force a gravitational well that crushed hope. The League moved as one, their unity born of trust forged through countless battles on Earth. Superman met Vader head-on, trading blows that shook the hangar deck and created craters in durasteel plating. Diana engaged the Inquisitors who accompanied Vader, her sword cleaving through their defenses with divine precision. Batman and Cyborg coordinated fire support, their tactics perfectly synchronized. Hal created constructs to shield the rebels and acolytes with the last dregs of his ring's power. Barry disarmed stormtroopers faster than they could react, his speed still formidable despite the dampening. Aquaman commanded the Star Destroyer's water systems to flood sections strategically, but Vader was relentless, a Dark Lord at the height of his power. He used the Force to hurl Superman into a bulkhead hard enough to crack the metal. He crushed Diana beneath a falling support beam that would have killed anyone less durable. He choked Barry until his speed failed and his vision dimmed. The dark side was his weapon, and he wielded it with mastery born of decades of suffering transformed into strength. Ayla Secura stepped forward, her lightsaber raised, her expression serene despite the chaos. "Anakin Skywalker," she said quietly, "I knew you once, before the fall. I know what you were capable of, the good you tried to do. This does not have to be your end. The Force offers redemption even now." Vader paused, his respirator cycling. "Anakin Skywalker is dead. I destroyed him, as I will destroy you and these anomalies who threaten my master's order." "Then you are already lost," Ayla replied with profound sadness. And she attacked. Their duel was transcendent, Jedi serenity against Sith fury, Blue Blade against Crimson in a dance that spoke to millennia of philosophy and conflict. The League watched, unable to intervene in a battle operating on a level beyond their comprehension. Ayla was outmatched in raw power, but fought with clarity and purpose. She showed Vader glimpses of what he had been, memories of Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, of Padme and the man who had loved her. Obi-Wan, standing at the hangar's edge beside Luke, felt those echoes through the Force and wept for his fallen brother. But Vader's pain was a wound that would not heal, a scar that went too deep for any balm. He struck Ayla down with a blow that pierced her chest, his blade finding her heart. She fell, her lightsaber clattering to the deck, her life fading into the Force like a candle extinguished by wind. The League cried out in fury and grief, no longer holding back anything. Superman's heat vision carved through Vader's armor, forcing him to retreat. Diana's lasso wrapped around his lightsaber arm, disarming him. Hal created a construct prison that held him for precious seconds. Barry vibrated through Vader's defenses and struck the control panel of his life support system. Cyborg hacked his cybernetics, sending feedback loops through his neural interface. Aquaman drove his trident through Vader's chest plate with all his considerable strength. Vader fell to one knee, his armor sparking and failing, his respirator gasping irregularly. He looked up at them, these impossible warriors who had shattered his certainty, and for the first time in years, a different voice emerged. Anakin Skywalker's voice, faint but present beneath the mechanical distortion. "What are you?" he rasped, and there was wonder in the question beneath the pain. "We're the Justice League," Superman said quietly, extending a hand despite everything. "And we're trying to find our way home. You don't have to be our enemy. There's still good in you. We can all feel it." For one heartbeat, one impossible moment, Anakin Skywalker reached toward that offered hand. Then the Star Destroyer shuddered as Batman's explosives detonated in sequence, the structure beginning to tear itself apart. The moment shattered. Vader pulled back, and the darkness reclaimed him. The League fled in their commandeered shuttle as the Star Destroyer's superstructure collapsed. They escaped into hyperspace with Obi-Wan guiding them toward a rebel rendezvous point, Luke sitting in stunned silence as he processed everything he had witnessed. Behind them, Vader crawled from the wreckage, his hatred deepened to levels that transcended mere emotion, his resolve absolute. The Emperor would hear of this failure, and the galaxy would burn for it. Ayla Secura died in the shuttle's medbay, her connection to the Force severing like a thread stretched too far. But before the end, she smiled at these warriors from another reality, at the hope they represented simply by refusing to surrender their principles even in a galaxy that seemed designed to crush such idealism. "The Force remembers," she whispered, as her body began to dissolve into pure energy, becoming one with the Force itself. "And so will I. Find your way home, warriors. But know that you have changed this galaxy simply by showing it that other ways are possible. That power tempered by compassion is not weakness. That choice matters even when destiny seems absolute." Her body dissolved into light, a final gift to a galaxy that desperately needed reminders that hope was not dead. The League honored her sacrifice in silence, each of them understanding that they had been fundamentally changed by this place, by its brutal philosophy and its fragile light. They did not know if they could return home. They did not know if they could survive in a galaxy built on fear and domination, but they knew they would try, because that was what heroes did. Even in a galaxy far, far away. They fled to the outer rim, to worlds where the Empire's reach was weaker, where the rebellion fought its desperate war. And there, in the shadows between stars, the Justice League began to make plans, not just to survive, not just to escape, but to fight. To stand against tyranny one system at a time, one oppressed world at a time, until either they found a way home or this galaxy found its own heroes to carry the torch forward. Superman, standing at the shuttle's viewport and staring at alien stars, made a silent oath. They would not become conquerors, they would not impose Earth's values through force. But they would stand as examples, as reminders that another way was possible. That strength could serve justice rather than merely enforce will. That power was meaningless without the wisdom and compassion to wield it responsibly. Behind him, his teammates made their own silent promises. Batman began cataloging the Empire's infrastructure, identifying weaknesses that could be exploited. Diana meditated on the Force and what it meant to encounter a philosophy of balance in a galaxy drowning in extremes. Hal worked to attune his ring to kyber crystals, seeking a way to restore his power. Barry studied the connection between Speed Force and the Force, wondering if understanding one would illuminate the other. Cyborg continued liberating droids wherever he found them, spreading the seeds of sentient rights. Arthur reached out telepathically to the galaxy's countless oceanic species, building networks that could move information faster than Imperial surveillance could track. And Luke Skywalker, caught up in events far larger than a simple moisture farmer could comprehend, began to understand that destiny was not a path laid out before you but a choice you made with every action. Obi-Wan had told him about the Force, about the Jedi, about his father. Now these warriors from another reality showed him what it meant to stand for something beyond yourself. Even when the entire galaxy seemed arrayed against you, the Empire would hunt them. The Emperor would devote resources to capturing or destroying them. Vader would pursue them with relentless hatred born of his humiliation. But the Justice League had faced impossible odds before. They had stood against gods and demons, armies and empires. They would stand here too, for as long as it took, for as long as the Force willed them to remain. They would be the hope this galaxy needed, the reminder that even in the darkest night, even under the harshest tyranny, the light could endure. They would survive, or they would die trying. But they would not surrender, not ever. That was the oath of the Justice League. In any reality, in any galaxy, in any universe where injustice demanded answer,